Welcome to the first edition of Lovey's A Life in Entertainment and Media. Today's guest is David Eilenberg of Roku. He's the head of content for this global company. Sit back, listen and enjoy. Today I'm interviewing David Eilenberg. Now David is the head of content for Roku and he has been around the entertainment block to say the very least. Head of ITV America, and he's done some fantastic work with some fantastic people. But David, thank you for taking part today. How did it all begin for you and what was your journey?
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I'm really pleased to be on the podcast. My journey in entertainment began actually mostly working on game shows. And I think for your audience, especially in the UK, interesting to note that the sort of really big first job for me was writing quiz questions for the US version of The Weakest Link. So actually, that was the sort of big job that got me started. And I still love quiz. It's seen a resurgence, I think, in recent years, but that's really where I got started, was writing trivia.
But what was your inspiration to go into the entertainment world? Because it is tough. I mean, you're at the upper echelon, but it's very hard to get to your position, but to actually get your foot into the door. What was the background and the inspiration?
Well, my dad worked in the theater and taught theater for a really long time. So I was a bit of a backstage kid and always had a taste for storytelling and entertainment. And given how hard it is to make a living in the theater, my joke, which is almost not a joke, is that I'm the only person in TV who, when he said he was going into TV, his parent was like, "Oh, well, at least you're choosing something stable." So it didn't seem crazy to me. And I think I was sort of just always raised around entertainment, even though it was a different kind of entertainment.
Where were you born, and are you from California originally?
Yeah, I grew up mostly in California, in the Bay Area. I was born in Michigan. We moved to Denver. Because my dad was an academic, we moved around a bit when I was a kid. But I grew up in California and have been in California my whole adult life, basically. I've certainly gotten the chance to be part of other types of entertainment communities, including in the UK. I worked for ITV for 6 years and got to spend a lot of time with the great creatives from the UK and working with the companies within the ITV family. So aside from LA, I would say actually London has been a place that I've met great people who I've done, really interesting collaborations with over the course of many years.
Absolutely, and of course it was the brilliant Robert Rinder that introduced us, and I saw his mum only last week at the Tower of London, actually. But your dad is a professor of theatre, isn't he? I mean, that's a hell of a title, certainly in your world.
Yeah.
But if you're a backstage kid, what sort of things did you go to, and what were you involved in as a kid?
I mean, I think when I think back to my childhood, the really sort of distinct thing that probably had the biggest impact was my dad produced for 3 years a vaudeville festival in San Francisco. And so, at a very impressionable part of my life, I was spending a lot of time with jugglers and contortionists, fire eaters, like really, an interesting subset of performers. And I loved the spectacle that went along with that. I loved the sort of, feeling of community amongst those sorts of performers. And I suppose it gave me a taste for a career in reality TV, which is where I've spent most of my time.
So how did you map out your education in order to get to this point? Did you go down a particular route?
Yeah, so I had an undergraduate education not in any of this. I studied history and literature. And then in graduate school, I studied screenwriting. So that was really what I initially came to the entertainment industry thinking I was going to do, which was to be a writer. And for a few years, managed to do it. I just found my way into the unscripted part of the business at a time when that part of the business was really just starting to blossom. So, from that weakest link experience, a lot of people at the beginning of the reality boom turned toward game show people because that was a sort of parallel skill set to what they needed, which was people who could construct challenges, people who understood the mechanics of game. Because if you think about it, many of the first big reality shows, many of which are on to this day, Survivor, Big Brother, like you name it, there's a lot of gameplay at the center of it, and that skill set became, I think, transferable.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How do you think it all translates? Because you did Love Island, didn't you? That was
Yeah.
a massive part of your
Yep.
entertainment world. Do you find that it translates into different continents? Because my nephew came second on Love Island in the UK.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. He in fact, he's still married to the girl that he met on Love Island, and they've got 3 lovely children. So
Love Island has uniquely minted quite a lot of real life couples whose love has stood the test of time. That's really nice to hear.
yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because you're throwing people into a washing machine, really, and find out what. But how do you think it translates globally? How do you think that works?
Um, it's a really interesting question. I think there there is universality to some of the really best formats in game and reality. I mean, as many countries as Love Island has traveled to, which is quite a lot now. Um, Early in my career, I had the chance to work for Michael King from the company King World, who distributed Wheel of Fortune. And
Right.
Wheel of Fortune is basically in almost every country in the world, or has
Yes.
been at one time or another. So I don't know that you set out to create a show with the entirety of the world in mind, but certainly when you manage to find something that is that adaptable, it's tremendous business, not
Oh
to
yeah.
mention an opportunity to shape culture. Um, I think a lot of it just has to do with, are you talking about universal themes and things that people can understand? Love Island has traveled because at its base, it's about finding love and friendship and having an adventure over the course of a summer. And that's something that resonates across cultures. I mean, I think it's pretty easily adaptable.
Absolutely. And your other things. I don't know. Do you have I'm a Celebrity in the States? Is that a big thing?
That's it. So it's an interesting question. I'm a Celebrity has been attempted a couple of times in the States and just didn't stick the same way that it has in the UK and other places. There are certainly like formats that have that mysterious quality to them where logically they would work everywhere, but for some reason they don't lodge in certain places.
And conversely, Survivor isn't as successful in the UK as it is in the US. I think I don't know how many episodes or how many series in the US they're up to, but it's quite significant. Whereas here, I think we've only ever had two
Yeah.
2 episodes or 2 series over the past
Survivor
10 years.
Survivor in the US is going into its 50th season, which is really just unbelievable when you think about it. Yeah, I think some of it has to do with the production and the timing and the network, right? Like, a show, even if it's a great show, still has to be scheduled and marketed, in a successful way in order to make it. And then there are really interesting questions of culture too,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't know if there's something just culturally in the UK that makes that format not as resonant. I'm sure we could speculate on that all day
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to see where formats travel and then where they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Your first experience working with a television production company, what was that like, walking through that door for the very first time? What were you, the runner, or how did that work, or did you go straight into right?
I was fortunate enough that my first job was a writing job. It was on a long lost MTV animated show called Head Trip. And that was at a time when MTV was taking chances on a lot of young sort of up and comers in their first creative jobs. It was really a terrific place for incubation at that time. This is a long time ago now. We're talking like year 2000. I would say most of that kind of energy to me now seems to exist in places like YouTube and TikTok, as opposed to in traditional TV. Like if you're an ambitious creative person in your early 20s who wants to do something just to do it, probably that's where you're going instead of trying to get a job in traditional television.
But do you not think that people have more opportunity now? I mean, we're sitting here. I've got my camera in front of me. I've got my podcast deck. I've got my lights. I'm actually sitting in my cabin at the bottom of the garden, and people have the opportunity to deliver globally. And I think that's brilliant. I think that people have greater levels of opportunity, but there is also a level of entitlement as well, which comes with that. But we could go down that route.
I think obviously for certain kinds of things, the cost of production has come way down and the cost of distribution effectively is zero, right? Like you can put something up on YouTube once you've made it, and that's why that's such a massively powerful platform. Yeah. So some of the barriers to entry have disappeared. If you want to make a living doing it, that's quite a different set of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And people seem to think that the TikTok generation are earning absolute fortunes, and the fact is they're not. They're bus boys and they're doing all their other things, waitresses and doing all their to make ends meet. But they do have a platform where they can find an audience far easier. Because 25 years ago, somebody aspiring to be an actor in Los Angeles in 2000, say, they'd be knocking on people's doors to try and get through that door. Now, if you're lucky and you have a decent broadcast on a podcast, you get opportunity. That's how I met Rob. I did one podcast with Unilad Lad Bible. Met Rob, he watched it, and that's how I ended up doing the thing with him and the bit with Vivica Fox as well. So you do have a greater level of opportunity. Do you think that the industry give people the chances that they deserve? Do you think there's that chance now because there are more production companies providing content? Do you think they're taking more chances with these creative kids?
I think it's an interesting moment. There is certainly a desire to find new voices. And again, I would just sort of say the UK is often a little bit ahead of the pack. Like, the fact that Baby Reindeer, as an example, came out of the UK creative community is testament to the fact that there's still more of a culture of risk taking. What I think is challenging right now is just getting anything to break out of the clutter. And so, one of the things that's happening as a result of that is that actually people are gravitating toward very well-worn titles, leaning on time-tested intellectual property, rebooting shows that people already know. And I think that conservatism is driven in some part by just how challenging it is to market things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were kind enough to introduce me to the brilliant Barry Ryan and some of the projects. I mean, he's totally off the wall and he's fantastic in what he does. But some of the work, and I'm not going to spoil it, but some of the work is literally a regurgitation of old titles, and they will work well because he's got the passion and drive to do it.
And I think there's also the opportunity to take known IP and then fashion something totally new. Like the example I point to frequently is Cobra Kai is such a good example of a show that's more than just a reboot, right? It's a total re-envisioning, and you're using that IP as a springboard. When I was at ITV, we had the opportunity to reboot Queer Eye, which was really, it was fairly nerve-wracking because had we done it wrong, that would have been bad. Like that's a, really well-loved, very cultural important IP. But what was so interesting is, even though I think the existence of the IP was part of what gave Netflix the confidence to go ahead with it, so many of the fans of the new show may not have even known that the prior show existed because you reached an entirely different generation. So it's interesting. I mean, I think that I think that right now people are leaning really hard on older formats, but you have to keep pushing to find new ones that will break out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the Day of the Jackal. I mean, they had Frederick Forsyth on board from day one on that, but it's almost alien to the original plot, and it's such a. I mean, it's a very captivating piece. But it's, as you say, and things get refashioned. You only have to look at the way that Disney refashioned their films, whether it be Beauty and the Beast. And it's all that type of stuff. How did you get involved with Roku? Because Roku is a completely different platform, isn't it? I mean, it's an aggregator in a lot of ways, but it's its own production company. It does so many wonderful things. How did you get involved with them?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up finding my way to the opportunity to become head of originals for Roku, and then about 2 years ago became head of content. And so now I'm worried not just about originals, but acquired programming, brand funded content, sports, just have to sort of think about how content exists throughout our channel and in our larger ecosystem. And Roku, for anybody on the podcast who doesn't know, we are in the UK, but even more widespread in the US, Canada, and Mexico, is the number one streaming platform in the US. So, more connected TVs in the US are using Roku software than any other, and that's the massive opportunity because it means the home screen that you see when you turn on your TV in over 85 million homes is a home screen that we're programming effectively. Wow. And that is real scale, and real scale I think in this day and age is hard to come by. So that was part of the appeal of the opportunity, and then I've just had the opportunity to learn so much over the course of this journey. The thesis of the company, Paul, is that ultimately all television will be streamed, and I think we see the migration from linear to streaming happening inexorably. And it's just a question of how do you serve the streaming consumer best in an environment where there are so many choices that part of our mission, as you point out, is to thoughtfully curate the entire streaming experience, right? Like if you come on to your TV and you want to watch sports, we don't want you to have to spend too much time searching for the sports you want to watch. We want to get you right to it, and that's the sort of curatorial mission of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, you do your own branded televisions now, and everything is, and you're in the UK as well. You do a lot of original stuff as well. We were lucky enough to go to the Bake Off last year. I mean, that was such a buzz, but to have Prue, Leith, and Paul Hollywood out in the States, I assume that they're big stars out there as well. I mean, they're
massive stars. It's really amazing. So yes, we do the Great American Baking Show, which is the format version of Bake Off.
Yeah.
We shoot with Paul and Prue in the tent in the UK with the UK team. I think the things that are more American about it are we have different hosts and then the contestants are American, but otherwise it's very much a real format version of the UK show. I think though what's incredible, and it's just a testament to how content travels, is before we ever launched the American version, Paul and Prue are massive stars because there are so many people watching Great British Bake Off in the US that they come with their own celebrity at this point. We had a new front presentation, which is our equivalent to the upfronts, and we had a number of big stars from many of the shows that we're putting on the platform. But man, Paul and Prue could not get out of the reception without everybody needing to take a selfie with them.
Yeah, of course. And they're nice people, aren't they? I think people lose sight of the fact that these celebrities, I mean, Paul's a baker by trade. That's his thing. And they're normal people. Yeah. Whatever way you carve it up, they're normal people. But of course, I was talking to somebody the other day I'm doing a project with, and they have to maintain a public appearance. They can never be grumpy. They can never show any emotions, because the minute they do, somebody will be there with a mobile phone or a camera, and then it just puts it all into the public domain, which is, I get that, it's a real shame. But if you go back 30 years, people could still live their lives and there wouldn't be that level of intrusion.
I mean, do you think that that's because of the traditional media or social media, or both? To me, it feels like a combination.
I think it's a combination. I think that everybody's now a photographer because they've got their phones. They can take their photos and dare I say it, sell it to the highest bidder if they get the right picture. I mean, that's how media works, right? So, but social media has actually allowed people to say what they want without any repercussions. And I find some of it quite vile, if I'm really honest with you. I get it that, like X is an open platform where you can say what you like about people. But actually people have feelings. They don't want to hear this. And whether you're a celebrity or just a normal member of the public, sticks and stones and what have you, but names do hurt sometimes. And it's just not, I don't think it's appropriate, but it's a mixture of both. Do you find that you're getting enough content within the world of Roku, within the world of entertainment? Do you think there's enough content coming through, or quality content?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an enormous amount of content coming through right now. And part of the challenge really is to just discern what content is right for which viewer and make sure that it gets recommended to them.
Yeah.
And, of course, now it's not just what's being newly produced. It's every show in the history of television is available somewhere. So, the vast majority of content that comes into the Roku channel is catalog content, and that ranges from news feeds from the major news bureaus to big catalogs of broadcast sitcoms to a 24/7 feed from Mr. Beast. Like, it's a very wide range. And I think in the next few years, that's going to expand even further because of the globalization of content. So I think, in a post Squid Game universe, the next hit can really come from anywhere. And that'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the years ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. Squid Game, Traitor, all these things that have going all over the world at the moment. And it's platforms such as BritBox, which has such a huge back catalogue, and I know you've got it out in the States, and I'm sure it's on the Roku platform. It's funny, isn't it, how people migrate back to those older programs. It could be Taxi if it was, or whatever from the States. Or
I think there is absolutely room for those sorts of services. So of course there are going to be, the mega services, Netflix, Amazon, like, that have some of everything. But there are real success stories in services that, on the one hand, have deep catalog, but on the other have a really specific identity. So BritBox is a very good example of that. I don't know if you know of Crunchyroll, but Crunchyroll is an anime service that Sony owns, and that's done incredibly well, in part because it's specific. So I think you'll see both. I think you're going to see, half a dozen services that have a huge general entertainment offering of all kinds, but then there's definitely still room for services that speak to a really specific audience about a particular kind of content if they if they curate it right. BritBox, I think, has done a good job.
Yeah, I did. And going back as a child, I always remember going to America for the very first time and how many channels you had available to you as a
Yeah.
viewer. Whereas here we were working on three.
Yep.
You had dozens. I mean, a lot of it is repetitive, but it was quite. The only thing I would say, and the difference, you'll understand what I'm saying here. The ad breaks and the cut in for advertisements during
Yep.
a broadcast. We don't have that. Even on the ITV side, we have it, but not as regular as they do in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think that advertising is certainly back in streaming. Like, there's, only a few years ago, a lot of the SVODs had no advertising whatsoever, and now everybody except Apple has an ad tier.
Yeah,
So I think advertising has certainly reasserted itself as part of the way that people view. But the ad load in streaming is a lot lighter, right? Like on linear TV, you're looking at, I think, an average of 18 minutes of ads an hour, which is really a lot.
yeah.
In streaming, including on the Roku channel, it's usually more like 6 to 8 minutes of ads an
Right.
hour, and I think that's just it's an easier viewer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is. I mean, I've got into. I've learned so many things since I last saw you around treatments and how long. Barry's been a brilliant
Yeah.
advisor, and the guys from Revelation have been brilliant as well. I don't think people realise how much work goes into getting your television program onto the screen. How much heartbreak is behind every single production. Because
Yep.
for every one that goes on, there's probably been a dozen that's been put into a commissioner somewhere who said, actually, thanks, but no thanks, that's not for us.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I can tell you almost statistically that for every 100 shows that get conceptualized, maybe 10 get sold, and of those, just a few get made. So it's a high volume of labor and, as you say, sometimes heartbreak
yeah,
on the road toward getting something made. I think, you know, if you can, and it feels like you personally do this quite naturally, it's one of the reasons why it's to your advantage as a creative person trying to get TV made to have a number of projects and a number of partnerships and a number of balls in the air at
yeah,
all time. I mean, you don't want to spread yourself so thin that the quality suffers, but you certainly, it's real tough when you only have one thing and you've staked
yeah,
everything on it.
yeah, absolutely. Because if you look at the different genres within entertainment, you'll have a production company that will specialize in true crime, for instance, or
Yep.
someone else will do scripted or cozy crime. It's finding the right people to get your ideas into. And as I say, I've been very lucky through yourself and Rob and what have you to meet these brilliant people, and they are brilliant, and they work so hard. From the person that's running around buying the sandwiches for the production crew, right the way through to the direct, everybody works so hard to get that onto the screen. And they're not always a success that you want them to be, are they? You know, a lot of money gets invested into a program, and I don't think people realise how much it actually costs. They'll moan about, or we have to pay X amount on subscription, but it costs. If you say it costs, I don't know, £400,000 an episode, sometimes that's the reality. That's how much it costs, and they don't get that. And there's got to be associated cost to everything.
It's been my experience, and obviously this is like focus group of one, but often the most successful shows that I've been involved with are either the easiest or the hardest in coming together.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, you have one where just everything goes right. Like, you sell it off the pitch, it moves really fast, it's conceptually clear, like it just comes together. And then there are ones that are just excruciating and die 1,000 deaths before you actually get them on air. But sometimes it's worth it. because by the time you actually make it, it's so battle tested in terms of everything that could go wrong, you've already anticipated. So, I think it's worth doing if you have a love for it, but it's certainly not always the easiest or most logical profession.
No, absolutely. Who was your role model? I mean, your dad's obviously right up there when it comes to it, but who was your role model within the entertainment field?
Well, there are people that I've observed and whose careers I've studied, ranging from Jeffrey Katzenberg to Ted Turner. I mean, you name it. Like, there are people I admire a lot, who I've observed from afar. But certainly, I think the most formative person in my career was surely Mark Burnett. I spent 10 years with Mark, first as a producer and then in development, and just, that was the person who shaped me in a lot of ways. I mean, and it was at a time when I was growing into who I was, and it was also at a time where he had many of the biggest shows on TV, and I just learned a tremendous amount from the almost 10 years I spent working for him.
If I remember rightly, he's a former member of the military, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He was in the UK military. There's a biography if anybody listening to your podcast wants to read it. But yeah, he had quite a journey from, I think he was a para actually, and then came to Los Angeles. Actually worked as a nanny for a wealthy family in LA, and then his first sort of big TV project, this was before my time, was a show called Eco Challenge. And that sort of led to Survivor, which led to lots and lots of other things.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And what does David watch? What do you watch on television? Are you an avid television watcher?
I watch a lot of sports. I think because I was going to say it's because watching entertainment, I sort of always have my professional vantage point working, and so sports gives me a chance to relax, although now Roku's in sports too, so I watch that with a professional POV as well. But no, I love live sports. I love a great drama, and then lately I've been finding my way back toward movies, and I think a lot of people are. So I think there was a moment, Paul, where the drama series was where the most sophisticated and interesting work was being done, but it feels like there's a pivot back toward feature films, which I really like. I'm excited about. I would love to see more energy from the creative community being put back toward features.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's been some really, really good films that have come out as well. Really, gripping. Yep. Not just there's some great franchises out there as we know, and they've done really well. But there's been some good independent films as well. What does the future look like for Roku? I mean, you're expanding. You're looking at other countries. What's the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to continue to scale. Our CFO recently gave an interview in which he sort of projected that 100 million households would be the next big number for us, and that's achievable within a reasonable time horizon, and that'll be a big deal if we get to that number. We want to continue to just provide the best consumer experience at the best price. And then from a Roku channel perspective, we're going to try to continue to find hidden gems out there in the content world, keep the offering fresh for the consumer, make sure that it's always free and ad supported, at least for our own channel offering. And then we're starting to see some interesting trends. To go back to a prior topic, some of the digital native content, stuff that we would think of as YouTube content, is working now within connected TV. So actually, I think there's a migration finally from YouTube world to TV world and back. So I'm keeping a close eye on that. And also really curious to see what happens in the sports world. So spending a lot of time thinking about that. We have now a Major League Baseball package. We're also the US home for Formula E. So it's an interesting mix of major sports, insurgent sports. We just announced X Games is going to be on Roku this coming year. And I'm really curious to try to get a beat on what's going to be the next breakout sport. It's interesting. It's interesting what people are suggesting. Certainly, one thing that might be interesting to note, just because it's been popular in the UK for such a long time, is that I've heard many, many people saying that rugby is about to break out in the US. So that's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, who knows?
Yeah. But the US, there is a competitive rugby team there, and in fact, I think in Las Vegas this week there is a rugby league match. I saw it advertised.
Yep.
So it's quite a but the world is so open now, and transport is so easy. You look at the NFL coming into London. They're here. They'll play 6 games. Major League Baseball. We do the authenticating for Major League Baseball when they come into London. We supply the people to do that. And who'd have thought? 10 years ago we wouldn't. They were probably just going into negotiations. So, but I've always been a baseball nut anyway. But that's a different story. But I think that it is about the opportunities where you no longer have to sit up until 2:00 in the morning and watch baseball on some repeat. Right. It's so contemporary now, and the Murdoch platforms in the UK, they're the ones that do it, and if Roku can nick some of that, and because you're competitively priced as well, your pricing structure is competitive.
And it's also, Paul, how younger generations are finding their way to sports fandom, which is often first through clips and highlights. So actually, they're discovering it often via social media. They're watching the clips and highlights and then having dialogue about that. So the live broadcast, while still important, is not the only entry point. So you don't need to sit up till 2 a.m. to watch baseball highlights on Instagram. Like, you can watch them whenever you want.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because on one of our Christmas shows on television this Christmas, it's the top 100 TikTok moments. Now, who'd have thought that somebody would have taken and turned that into a television program? I mean, that is absolutely bonkers. But what I'd like to say is thank you so much for your time today. It's been a very potted history of David and Roku and what have you. If there's any opportunities, if you've got anybody you think, it'd be good to talk to, then, I know time's a very precious commodity, but please pass them my way. I would love to talk to them. And if your dad wants to chat as well, I would absolutely love that. That would be marvelous.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I will say I've done a handful of podcasts, but not one that's hosted by somebody who has professional interrogation expertise. So thank you for treating me gently over the course of the interview. And yeah, I think, look, if there's one parting thought, and it's, I think, why you personally have so much going on, it's that if you're going to make great reality TV, you have to be tethered to reality. And like the fact that you've brought so much real life experience into entertainment. I mean, even somebody like Paul, as you point out, had a real career just doing what he does before he ever got in front of a camera. Like that's always going to be where the next great story comes from. So yes, certainly, if I think of other people who can come on and provide you some great stories, I'd love that. And in the meantime, I appreciate you having me. It's been really good talking to you.
Thank you so much. Send my regards to your lovely family.
To you as well, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Thank you so much. I know your time is very precious, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
God bless you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.